welcome to another episode of the CEO Peak. I am Dave Osh, the CEO of Varlinks that sponsors this show. We transform the invisible human tendencies that inhibit business performance in high complexity. Our purpose is to evolve leadership effectiveness so that together we create a ripple effect of unity in the world. The CEO Peak Show is devoted to sharing the thought leadership of successful leaders of mid-sized companies. Such a leader is our guest today, Matt Powell, the CEO of Moroch. Founded 40 years ago, Moroch is an independent integrated marketing agency based in Dallas, Texas. With dozens of offices across the United States, Moroch has the ability to work with clients such as McDonald's, Six Flags, Planet Fitness, Disney, Midas, and others in other large corporations. Moroch's integration model includes expertise in creative, digital, social media, planning, analytics, media, multicultural, experiential, and PR, all under one roof, working together on behalf of over 100 brands. Matt joined Moroch almost 20 years ago as a media planner. And a good story, on his first week, Matt was sent to observe at his first client meeting. But when his boss didn't make her flight, he presented the agency's media plan himself on his first week. So Matt's been stepping up, overseeing solving media puzzles for some of the largest companies. He's an evangelist for new platforms and technologies. And Matt described himself as a constantly evolving. And Moroch's website actually mentions that they do well to keep up with him, and I will do my best to keep up with him in this interview today. So hello, Matt, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave. Happy to be here and appreciate you having me on.
You are almost celebrating now the 20th anniversary, right, in May?
Yes.
So what does it feel actually to work 20 years all the way to the CEO role?
Yeah, I know it's not a natural path to this role that I've been on. And I feel, on one part blessed, but the other part definitely feel like I worked into this role. But, I had a couple short stops at other agencies before I joined Moroch. And I knew by the time I got to Moroch what good would look like in terms of working for a company. I went through some pretty rough experiences. And really, there were two goals that I had when I came to Moroch. One was stability, which I feel like at 20 years, you can probably check the box there. And then secondly, I was looking for a place where I would never hit a wall in terms of growth. And in 20 years, there's been a couple of moments where I felt like maybe that was about to happen. And, I would sit down with the agency leadership and we would find a way around that wall and keep growing. So our agency went through a crisis about 4 years ago, really three to 4 years ago. And so in that process, they really, the two founders of the agency started looking at what does the next 35 years look like for this agency and who do we put in place? And so, I feel like really there were two reasons for me in this role. One was they wanted the established culture that they had built and grown over that time period. They wanted that to continue into this next stretch. So they wanted somebody that knew the culture well. But then secondly, they also wanted it to go to a place that the company hadn't been before. And I was running the team that was driving the most growth for the agency. And I think they felt like I would be able to continue that. So yeah, it's an unnatural rise to this role, but it's exciting time, truly.
Yeah, it's a beautiful lesson, actually, when you hit the wall and you have this conversation. So many people just don't have these conversations. They're just like, they hit the wall and they just run away. And then sometimes they lack this endurance in today's world, that hectic, that everyone is jumping from job to job. Sometimes it's like the endurance. Something happens or evolves when you have kind of a more endurance in one place. Did you feel it the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's something beautiful about that. And I do find that people tend to avoid confrontation in life in general. And I'm somebody that certainly falls in that category. And so the easy thing to do is run. And so even when we have people that come and visit with me, the question we ask is, are you running to something or are you running from something? And in every case where I had opportunity, it was more about running from a situation than running to. And so I decided to fight through it. And I do think there's some beauty in that for sure. Ironically, side story, one opportunity did come along about 12 years ago that I very seriously considered and was pretty close to taking. And that was one of the moments where I fought through the wall. About 8 years later, I interviewed the person who, in essence, took that job, and I had a chance to kind of see what would my career have been if I had gone down that path versus staying in the spot I was at. And I very clearly, it was evident to me that I had done the right thing by staying in the same spot. So it was good validation for what I kind of already believed.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story too. It's so difficult in the complexity of life to assess, what happens in junctions of life, that we can go different places and we stay in one place and
Yeah.
we wonder what would have happened in the other place. So
Right.
I like to jump into the topic that recently we are kind of shifting our podcast into, is more into the leadership teams and how to build teams. I'd love to hear actually of the experience which I had similar to yours, that I was promoted from a COO to CEO of a 1,000 employee companies. And one day my peers and my colleagues become my direct report. So how does this shift happen? I struggled through that time,
Yeah.
Like suddenly it was a shift that I didn't expect. I thought it would be like, hey, it's easy, but it wasn't that easy. How was it for you?
Yeah. It wasn't easy either. I mean, because you're going to inherit people, to your point, who are your peers for one moment, and then they're not the next. And, finding the balance between, we're still the same people looking at each other across the table. Like, I know nothing magical happened to me between 2 days ago when I wasn't in this role and I'm in this role now. But also starting to establish, my role requires certain level of decision making and certain level of accountability and responsibility that is different than it was 2 days ago. So I think, to me, I guess, because I've been through this now 3 times at different points in my career, and every time I don't think it was a smooth transition. I think maybe I got a little bit better at anticipating what was coming, but it was still going to happen. I would say the one lesson I learned that I did apply is not to be afraid of just getting the tougher conversation on the table. Probably what I did in the first couple times was avoid the conversation, and we ended up having it anyway, but we let tension build up before that. So I think in this last round, it was, let's go have the tough conversation. I'm in a different role now, and we have to change expectations in terms of what our relationship looks like and be okay with that. Acknowledging the elephant in the room seemed to help expedite the transition.
And when you say tough conversations, are they more one-on-one or they are more as a team?
One-on-one. Because I think the mistake I made early in my career was believing that the way I worked and the way that I thought was the same as everybody on the team. And over time, you learn more and more just how much, I could be in a room with 3 people and all 3 of us have a different view about what this company is, why I'm here, what keeps me going every day. And so in a moment like this, where, they individually may have had their own expectations around their own growth or opportunity, or who should be in that role. So they're different conversations in that instance versus as a team. But I would say on the flip side, pretty critical that we start coming together as a team. And that's a lot easier said than done. I found, I remember once telling my wife that, when is high school going to end? Because I felt like, as you move up and up in the world, you would expect that, some of the things that you saw and dealt with at high school would go away, but we're all human, and human nature, and that kind of behavior persists. So anyway, I think learning how to get past that and start to come together as a team is pretty critical.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's one of the toughest things to build. Leadership team it's pretty tough. When you mentioned to do the tough conversation and one-on-one, did you have a chance to have tough conversation? Because many CEOs kind of like, do we bring this elephant? Because sometimes the elephant is in a room within the team, not just on one-on-one between individuals. And these tough conversations within a team are pretty challenging because you know where you start, you don't know where you end.
Yeah. I would say I did better on the one-on-one side. I think if I was to go back, I probably would have done more of what you just said in terms of getting the group together. I think we would have come together more quickly, if we had had some of those conversations as a group as well. So I would say that's probably a lesson I've learned that I don't intend to make that mistake again. Like, how do we quickly start coming together and realizing we have different expectations for why we're here, but ultimately we have one goal that we're working towards. So how do we overcome that and come together?
Yeah. I like to joke with CEOs that they have two types of teams. Either they play like golf teams, you just accumulate the results of the marketing and sales and customer service or engineering, and you have a football or basketball team. It's very different teams, right? And then the image kind of comes very clear. How do we work as a team? It's kind of
Yeah.
it's a great metaphor to assess that.
Sports analogies are always fascinating to me. And the one that I've heard that I resonates with me is, in basketball, you can have a superstar player and put, lower level players around them and they can be successful. Like, you see that all the time. Soccer, on the other hand, you can have the best player in the world, but if you are subpar at other aspects of the positions, you're not going to perform optimally. And I think most organizations like mine are more like a soccer team than they are a basketball team. And so, how do you have excellence across all the positions and truly come together as a team versus a basketball where you can have one really great guy or gal and kill it? We're more like a soccer team. So how we come together is a little bit different.
I love it. I'm going to borrow it. Do you need to have any copyright arrangements between us?
No, you can run with
I
that.
love it. It's such a great metaphor, actually. It's like something between, it's a different way to look at teams, not just as a golfer, but when you work as a team, what type of team you work like? Is it a soccer or basketball? Right. I see that.
You can take that analogy one step further too, which is uh, who's running the plays. Because I also find that a lot of teams where the breakdown is you've got multiple people trying to call the plays. And in sports, it's very clear. There is a play, and this is what we're doing, and you execute against it. I do find that a lot of companies struggle with multiple people trying to call the plays versus do we all know what play we're running? Like, I think it sounds really simple, but it's hard to do in practice.
So I'm curious. We had an early call and we talked about building the ideal team. And I want to hear your views about it. How do you build actually this team?
Yeah, I mentioned a minute ago that I think early in my career, I was looking for people that were a lot like me because I feel like I know how to confidently solve for things and I'm competent. So why wouldn't I just find more of myself? And I definitely over time have realized that the more complementary you can have from a team member perspective, the better. So one of the resources we actually use, I have a good friend who runs a global nonprofit organization called PACE. It started in Manchester, and he builds teams all across the world on a fly. He has to do it very quickly. And what he has actually developed is a program called Shapes, Life Shapes, which really it's kind of a variation on things people may have seen, like colors and things like that, where kind of there's four basic types of personalities, and how they interact is very unique and very different to each of the shapes. And so one of the things we've actually been doing, especially during the pandemic, is as an organization going through some workshops around that to understand how we work and how we think and how we complement each other. So back to answering your question, like, I really do think about, do I have those different elements in the room? So one of the shapes, as an example, is a circle, and those type of people tend to really lean in and understand the human reaction to things. So how is this going to affect team members emotionally? How is this going to affect how they feel? And that was a low shape for me. And so early in my career, I would miss, it was the greatest idea ever, but when it came to execution, there were people that it just didn't sit well with them. And so having somebody on my team that leans in and understands that piece of it when we're at the start of an idea or direction or vision is really critical. And I could go through each shapes as well. So that is definitely one of the factors. So I think, over time, it's been less about the hard skills. Hard skills are important, and you need those in a diverse organization like ours, but also diverse ways of approaching and thinking and interacting with each other, I think is pretty critical as well.
Yeah, that's such a great insight. I think all of us have that this bias, and I used to hire people that I wanted to be as closer to my version of myself, which there is a time in life that the ego tells you that you're the best, that everyone needs to be in the team like you. And everything changed. I became a CEO when I was the late 40s, almost 50. And that was and it's kind of shifted out from there's kind of time with the age that you start to shift your orientation from self to others, and then actually you see all the flaws and you see how much you need to focus on the team building rather than it's a beautiful place to be.
It is. It's actually kind of comforting too, because I think I think there is, especially in America, I feel like there's just this idea that you can do it all and you can achieve it all, and there's nothing that you can't do. It's actually freeing to start to realize other people are better at things than you, and their opinion is more important than mine in these situations. So I agree. It's kind of a freeing moment for sure.
Yeah. And especially when it comes to diversity, which is now a big topic in the last, I don't know, many months. And I think about the moments that I needed to interview somebody in Taiwan and the language barrier. Immediately, there was a rule that I learned that when you speak with somebody that the English is not a native language, like people like me, it's not my native language, immediately you take like 1/3 of the intelligence because the words are not there, and it's a bias that we have, like so many biases. That's why what you're doing with the circle, with the shapes, is understanding different way people operate is a beautiful process to go through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else that you want to add before we start wrapping it up about building teams and in your career, and what's your something to share about what you plan forwards with building leadership teams?
Yeah, I think, I kind of had this point of view that when I first started moving into management, Gen X, which is the generation I'm in, was an easier generation to manage in that we were a smaller group, and the way that we kind of played into who our bosses were, like we didn't behave that differently than the generation that preceded us. And then along come the millennials, and I think that they kind of were starting to rewrite the rules and change the game. And it was an interesting moment because my boss didn't understand that because they were still working with me. We were the ones that were kind of the front line of this is changing, workplace is changing. And so, that was 10, 12 years ago. And now you're really seeing the full effect of that generation in the workplace. And then along comes the pandemic, which I think is also rewriting the rules about how do you come together as an organization and work. So it's definitely on my mind right now. It's an interesting moment. And a lot of the stuff that I'm reading and thinking through is more than ever having your team understand the purpose of what you're trying to do, other than that this is a job and I make money and this is where I go, between 8 and 5 every day. That's going to be much more critical. And I think as that generation moves into higher and higher leadership roles, I think that's going to even become more critical that we have a purpose, beyond just making money and this is a job. I think that's something that I think the pandemic probably just heightened or fast forwarded with organizations.
I can see through the lens of my kids. The youngest one is 23 and she's now working, and wow, her boss will have a major challenge because she's so much purpose driven. I cannot imagine myself in her age, 23, to be so much purpose, mission driven. Somebody that won't speak about purpose with her, there's no way that she will join the company because she's so much driven. And my other older kids,
In the interview process now, it's much more common for people to ask me about the culture of the organization and the values of the organization than it is the mission or vision. And that's new. That's a new element that really hadn't started until the last year or two. And, that generation is leaning in. They want to understand, do you practice what you preach? How do you treat your people? I think that's a great place to be. It's going to make me work harder to make this a place where, people feel like they're loved and respected.
Yeah, it was such a great time to spend with you. It was kind of a joyful interview with you, Matt. I had a great time.
Oh, well, thank you.
And thank you for taking the time and being with us on the show today.
You bet. Very much appreciate it, and appreciate being a guest on the show today.
And thank you for watching the show, and I'm looking forward to see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.